So without further ado, let's jump into the insights that Evan is going to share with us. And they've got one of the world's most comprehensive databases of mobile location data. And they've been doing some really fascinating analysis in terms of what COVID-19 and the impact that's had on foot traffic and other activity around the world. So Evan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me here. Really excited to showcase how mobile location data is being used right now in these two phases. Phase one, which we're all experiencing right now, and phase two, which a lot of us are planning for. You see the agenda in front of you. I got 10 minutes to walk through it, so I'll go quickly through it, but hopefully there'll be some good questions at the end there. A little bit about mobile location data. Where does it come from? If you've ever downloaded an app to your phone and the app says this app would like to know your location while you're using it, could be Words with Friends, a music app, a news app, a sports weather app. UberMedia gets mobile location data from over 150,000 different apps. Basically, what we do as a company is all day, every day, we're basically like drinking from the fire hose mobile location data. Phones giving off their location intermittently. We're collecting all of that data. We're doing a lot of work to process it, contextualize it, make sure it's really, really accurate. And then we're storing it as essentially anonymous aggregated insights that can provide a lot of deep understanding into human movement, whether that's locals or tourists. And what does that mean? That means UberMedia as a company on a monthly basis gets data on about 1 billion people around the world, as well as 300 million here in America. And it goes back in time. So we want to understand how things looked 2018 versus 2019, and then of course how they're looking 2020. We already have all of that data. And for today's purposes, we are leveraging it to understand two phases of tourism. And I like the theme of this webinar, Clarity in a Time of Crisis, because looking at these two phases is personally how I've found clarity in the time of crisis. The first phase is where we are right now, flattening the curve. And we'll talk about that momentarily. And then the second phase is as we begin to flatten the curve, understanding as quick as we can how tourism has changed and what's actually driving visitation to our tourism assets in our destination. So the first phase we're looking at is flattening the curve. This is where we all are, whether you're a county, a city, or even a state. All of us are trying to flatten the curve. And we looked first as a precursor of social distancing. Are we social distancing effectively? If so, we should see a flattening of the curve. And if we see a flattening of the curve, we can then enter this phase two. So it is a case of one thing sort of happening after another, but social distancing is something we can measure at UberMedia pretty effectively. And we have a few different methodologies to do it, but it's all based on mobile phones and where people are going. For the subsequent slides I'm about to show you, we looked at social distancing as people actually going to physical locations around America. So it's not just did someone get in their car and drive far distances. It's more about did these people actually show up in places that they can interact with others and subsequently not be social distancing. So we have a database of about 1.5 million points of interest at UberMedia. And so we essentially are looking at social distancing for different cities around the world on a daily basis. All of this is updated on our COVID website, actually. So I'm going to walk you through two cities to show how they contrast pretty dramatically, because again, social distancing is a precursor for flattening the curve, what we believe. So we're looking first at Seoul, Korea here. Now, before I talk about what's on the slide, the dark blue line there, that is our baseline foot traffic index, which allows us to compare each cities. And what that's basically telling us are people social distancing more or less on a daily basis. If it's above 100, people are social distancing less. If it's below 100, people are social distancing more. A score of 150 means people are out and about 50% more than usual. A score of 50 means people are out and about 50% less than usual. So here we're looking at South Korea, which has been in the news a lot for its success in either social distancing or flattening the curve. And what's interesting we see here is February 18th is when the 31st COVID-19 patient was identified, and the super spreader. It was news lines everywhere. There was a very quick reaction to social distancing that happened in South Korea, in Seoul specifically. You see it go from basically 96, which is basically average, dropping overnight, basically 50% less social activity happening. People are social distancing 50% more by dropping down that much. You see it pretty much stays down that way, even gets lower. And what we see is that light blue line. It's not like cases go away immediately. We see it peak a little bit more as we enter March, but then we see a complete flattening of the curve. And they're very well known for flattening the curve. And what's neat about Seoul is we have data since beginning of February to look at. But let's look at another opposite sort of timeline, if you will, contrasting timeline. Here we're looking at Miami-Dade County. And you see even before the COVID-19 outbreak, we're seeing social distancing basically above, the foot traffic index is above 100, meaning on average, people are actually going out and about and doing things more than what we usually see them are in years previous, especially. So what's interesting about this is the topic of social distancing wasn't unknown to Miami. In fact, the Herald was writing about it in March 14th, talking about companies already having their people work from home. So companies were sort of self-imposing social distancing by getting their employees to work from home. But what's really interesting, if we consider social distancing a precursor to flattening the curve, on March 22nd right there, that is the first day the traffic index drops really dramatically to 48, which was the exact same slide we previously looked at in South Korea. But on the same day that South Korea only had 31 cases, Miami has 227. So we're seeing a basically delayed reaction to social distancing. And in fact, the shelter-in-place order wasn't put in after that. Now you can see that light green line right there. Essentially, the curve is not being flattened. It's continuing to go up. So if we believe social distancing is a precursor to flattening the curve, we can look at a destination like this and use mobile location data to understand that the curve might not be flattened there for at least another week, maybe even 2 weeks or more. So what can destinations do right now? If you don't have access to mobile location data, no worries. You can still look at how many cases your city or your county is reporting every day. And you can personally monitor, are you flattening the curve? Because as you start to see less growth in the amount of cases each day, which we are seeing already around certain areas of this country, you can then enter phase 2. And phase 2 is an exciting phase because it's really about people going out and doing things. But people going out and doing things, which is why there's a parenthesis around the new right there, is that this new post-COVID-19 tourist might be very, very different than pre-COVID-19. And there's really only one way to find out, and that's to really monitor, are we seeing growth in certain tourism assets, whether that's public parks, public spaces, anything that's really open, and who is driving that growth, and how much is that growth going up? And the first thing a lot of us are going to experience, whether we're flattening the curve or not, is the idea of spring fever. Now, spring fever is going to be prevalent all across the country. We see it on Facebook photos of some of our friends out there. Here we're looking at Buffalo River in Arkansas. And it's interesting, I think actually since looking at this data, they've actually closed a lot of places in Arkansas to prevent people from going out into these open public spaces. But you'll see the weather on the 26th and 27th there, just gorgeous, 90s, 80-degree weather, perfect for kayaking on a river. And what we did is we looked at the data year over year to look at origin markets. This year in 2020, 90% of the visitors lived over 50 miles away. So true tourists, if you will. Last year, only 40% about lived 50 miles away. So a very, very different makeup. Less locals basically going and partaking it, and more people driving from really far distances. Is that going to be consistent everywhere? No, it might not be. There might be a lot more locals doing things, and that becomes really important to look at. For example, let's take a look at beaches in sunny southern Florida. We all saw the news stories of the college students that wouldn't give up partying because just for coronavirus, they wanted to stay down there. But public policy was put in place and beaches were closed. And as a result, a lot of people who are tourists either left the area or canceled their trips to come there. So we again looked at visitation origin markets year over year. And on the flip side, unlike Arkansas, we're seeing a much more hyper local audience, much more basically locals who are being out and about and driving that activity. And we believe at UberMedia, there are going to be a lot more locals in the future going out and doing stuff for people in drive market distance, at least. So important to sort of keep your pulse on that, because locals could very much well become the new tourists. Going to the other side of the country, we're looking now at beaches in Southern California. Beaches in Los Angeles County actually were closed officially March 27th. And we see some of the beaches, and I'll walk you through that if it's a little hard to read the text at the bottom there. But essentially, most of the beaches at the bottom that are flatlining are in Los Angeles County. But one beach in blue that sort of stays above, that's Crystal Cove. That's not in Los Angeles County. That's in Orange County. And if you look all the way to the right, that blue, you actually see it go up the weekend before last, meaning people are still going out to the beach and spending time there. So again, let's look at origin markets and let's see how they've changed or stayed the same. And what we see over year, again, 2020, we're seeing a lot more locals, makes a lot more sense. People who live less than 50 miles away make up 93% of everyone. But we still see people coming from Palm Springs, maybe a smaller percentage, but we still see people in that driving distance, even though it's a couple hours drive. It's hard to make that on a day trip, even with the lack of Los Angeles traffic. But again, knowing the which beaches or which locations are starting to see an increase in visitation and understanding who is making up that increase on a daily or weekly basis really allows you to market to them really effectively. And then lastly, here as part of this example, we also looked at a bunch of 5-star hotels around the country that are still open. And we contacted them. We learned that some of them are doing 15, some of them are doing 30% occupancy on weekends. People in cities, perhaps like Los Angeles, trying to get out. In fact, in Santa Barbara, this one hotel, the beach remains open there. And in a place like Los Angeles, it's not open. So we looked at visitation. And what's interesting is that in-state visitation has increased dramatically, as you might imagine. That's the predominant makeup, driving basically guests. But Los Angeles is still about 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 guests are from the Los Angeles DMA. So that hasn't fluctuated a lot. But what's interesting is more people from other areas in California have made up the difference in visitation. So again, this is just trying to keep in touch with who is actually going out there and doing stuff and how do we market to them. So our 2 key takeaways here is 1, let's all work to flatten the curve. Social distancing works, and if we can use mobile data to sort of predict if we're going to flatten the curve, great. If we can't, monitor every day the amount of cases that is being announced in your destination, and ideally everyone will see a flattening of the curve. It's just some will see it sooner than later. And then the second, which is honestly a lot of people we're working with are planning for this right now, is identify ways to understand who your first movers are. Who are these people going out and doing things as we start to see visitation go up, as we start to open up and ease restrictions in our destination, because that really allows you to effectively market it to them. And we really believe these local tourists are now really extremely valuable tourists. They've been cooped up all inside. They almost all have cars. They are ready to drive. Gas is inexpensive relatively. And so knowing what zip codes they come from can be really, really valuable. And then lastly, one little pro tip, because we have access to all this data. If you do want to go grocery shopping to avoid the crowds, go on a Tuesday and avoid Fridays. That's when the least traffic are in grocery stores across the country. So just a fun little tidbit there.
So Evan, are any health authorities using your geolocation data, your mobile data, to assess the usage of things like beaches? And obviously it could help them monitor what's appropriate and perhaps inappropriate behavior.
Yeah, it's been a pretty fast-paced past few weeks, and the use cases of mobile location data have changed a lot. 3 weeks ago, it was monitoring what neighborhoods are going out and doing things. Where are they going out and doing things? People were playing whack-a-mole trying to close locations. They didn't really know what to close, or if they needed to close, or do we need to send police there? We have police in our beaches now in LA that are actually finding people. And it's really evolved now into understanding what communities are social distancing. And now it's really involved into the topic of contact tracing, which is a whole other use case and topic. And now it's really about understanding really a lot of dense urban environments. Understanding, are people really social distancing, and using just a metric on that, as we all really want to flatten this curve and honestly move on from this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it reinforces the fact that DMOs need to be tightly integrated with their sort of government health organizations. And so if you are accessing this information, then ensuring that, that's being picked up by health authorities, because the analysis we've done from both your research and other analysis, Evan, is this entire recovery is going to be driven by health statistics. So unless we flatten the curve, drop the curve substantially, improve health statistics dramatically, and then obviously there's a perception issue as well that goes with that, it's going to be impossible and frankly irresponsible to open up businesses and create opportunities the way we all want to.
Yeah, turning off the economy, especially in a state like California, was almost an overnight procedure. The mayor of LA was on TV, and that night everything gets closed. That's not an essential business. It will be an opposite approach as we enter the reopening of states like California or cities like Los Angeles, where it's phased, but we'll we'll see people going out and doing things. I mean, that hotel in
Yeah.
Santa Barbara is a really good indication of people willing to get in their car and just drive an hour and a half, 2 hours to go and visit a beach and be out and see fresh air and not around crowded areas. And obviously, many states are full of experiences like that.
Yeah. So again, guided by health statistics and official health advice. Now, Andrea is asking how they can find data like this on their city. I know you've got a number of cities on the website, the COVID-19 UberMedia.com website that's there. And obviously you've got a variety of solutions, haven't you? Beyond
Yeah,
that.
we have a variety of solutions, and we realize it's not sort of one size fits all. Some destinations absolutely want to monitor, are they social distancing and flattening the curve? And you can see examples of that at the COVID-19 UberMedia.com. Some of their destinations aren't as concerned about that. They're leaving that up to maybe major cities, and they're in more rural destinations, and they want to understand more. Are we seeing people visit certain areas in our destination, like a beach in Santa Barbara, just as an example? And who's making up that? Is 100% locals on weekends? Is people driving down from San Francisco? Because I want to sort of market to them. I want to understand who's visiting, and I want to basically come June and July, I want to be prepared to engage these people who are sort of first movers and willing to go out there, because destinations really, everyone on this call has a wealth of exciting opportunities for people to go out and do things. And perhaps it's a unique opportunity for sometimes locals to re-explore their destination, not just the typical tourist.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, emphasizing the importance of locals. They're going to be fundamental to that first step in the recovery.